Preface to Lyrical Ballads. It's an essay written by William Wordsworth and it is published in 1801. And this preface contains Wordsworth's philosophy of poetry. It's universally acclaimed as manifesto of romantic criticism. Wordsworth wrote this preface to defend the poetic theory on which the lyrical ballads have been composed. He confesses that he was reluctant to write this preface at the beginning, and he gives some reasons for the hesitation. And first one, he was anxious about the response of the readers. He feared that the readers might look coldly on his arguments. And second one, he may be misunderstood as trying to force the readers to accept his views. And he was anxious that the decision and detailed explanation of the new theory would cause the preface to swell into undesirable size. Then William Wordsworth explains the purpose of writing the preface. He knew that he was writing an unconventional poetry which is new kind both in theme and language. So he does not want to throw his poems on the readers abruptly without any adequate introduction. He wants the readers that the poems in the collection are of a new kind, radically different from the conventional poetry. People should not expect the same pleasure they got from the conventional poetry. So he thinks that it is the duty of the writer to make his viewpoint clear before introducing a new product. He explains the subject matter of poetry. Humble and rustic life was chosen as a subject matter of poetry because he believed that essential passions of the heart find better soil to develop in that condition of life. Besides, the rustics are not polluted by the constraints of urban existence. Thus, they are under less restraint and speak a plainer and more emphatic language. In rustic life, the passions and feelings of the village people are closely related to the beautiful and permanent forms of nature. Then he explains what should be the language of the poetry. Wordsworth proposes that the language most appropriate for use in poetry is the language used by rustic people, because it is derived from genuine experience of the rustics who hourly communicate with the objects from which the language is originally derived. Language of the rustic people is under less influence of social vanity and free from complexities of urban life. And he says that this language is more permanent and a far more philosophical than the language propagated by the Augustines. William Wordsworth claims that all the poems in the volume are written with a distinctive purpose. He emphasizes the purposiveness of the poetry, even though it is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The poems have a moral purpose of enlightening the readers and purifying their affections. Another trait of the poems in the lyrical ballads is that personification of abstract ideas are rarely used in the volume. The rejection of the Augustine practice of using highly stylized and polished diction is also a remarkable trait. So he made it clear that in his own words, my purpose was to imitate and to adopt the very language of men. According to Wordsworth's theory, there is hardly any difference between the language of prose and that of poetry. He asserts that even in the best poetry, the truly significant passages follow an order of words which is similar to that found in good prose. He declares that there neither is nor can be any essential difference between the language of the prose and metrical composition. He explains this by referring a sonnet written by Thomas Gray. Both language of prose and that of poetry are intimately related in their nature, function, and appeal. Wordsworth says, poetry sheds not tears such as angels, but natural and human tears. Here, Wordsworth stresses the element of naturalness that characterizes the media of both prose and poetry. Then he explains his concept of poet. According to Wordsworth, poet is a man speaking to man, a man endowed with more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness, and a great knowledge of human nature. And he says, poet has a greater degree of imagination so that he can feel or react emotionally to events which he has not directly experienced. Then Wordsworth says, poet has a comprehensive soul so that he can share the emotional experience of others. The poet writes under one guidance alone, that of the necessity of imparting immediate pleasure to a human being looking upon him as a human being. Then here the next Wordsworth agrees with Aristotle's concept that poetry is the most philosophic of all writing. The object of the poetry is truth, not individual and local, but general and operative. Poetic truth is much higher than truth of history or philosophy. He continues with his argument that while history deals merely with particular facts and philosophy with abstract truth, poetry alone deals both with the particular and the universal. He introduces the definition that poetry is the breath and finer spirit of all knowledge. It is the impassioned expression which is in the countenance of all science. This explains how poetry fuses together passions and knowledge. But poetic truth is superior to scientific truth as it is based on universal fact. The aforesaid definition shows that poetry ultimately led to enlightenment through excitation of emotions. It is the first and last of all knowledge. That the poets do follow the steps of the man of science, bringing sensation into the midst of the objects of science. Then he introduces the definition. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. In this definition, Wordsworth stresses the inspirational origin of the poetry and its features of spontaneity and emotional appeal. Thank you. Please subscribe and enable the bell button to get recent updates of this channel.